はい、それでは定刻になりましたので始めたいと思います。本日第72回の東京大学医学教育セミナーということで、本日も講師の方はメアリー・リー先生にお願いしております。リー先生の紹介についてはこちらに略歴が入っておりますけれども、今年の 10月1日からこちらの医学教育国際研究センターの方にいらしていただきまして、来年の3月末まで来られるということで、毎月こういうふうにセミナーの方をお願いしているという状況です。本日のテーマですけれども、前回の一つのつながりということですが、前回は学習者の評価アセスメントについてお話しいただきました。それをどういうふうにそのカリキュラムとかあるいは教員のですね、能力開発につなげていくのかというところが大きなテーマで、本日はそれについてお話しいただくようにお願いしております。このテーマはですね、あまり今までその日本で語られてないのではないかなと思うんですけれども、今日本の医学部においては認証評価アクレディテーションが大きなテーマになっておりまして、その中でその学習者の評価をどのように、大学医学部をですね良くしていくために使えるのかというふうな観点がかなり盛り込まれているというふうに感じます。その部分をですね、どういうふうに対応していったらいいのかというふうなことをですね、今日の講演の中でいろいろ示唆があるんではないかなというふうに感じております。それでは李先生、よろしくお願いします。
Thank you so much. So today, thank you so much for coming out in a very cold, windy evening, and I appreciate your coming to the seminar. I want to remind folks that I got some feedback previously that sometimes I'm using some educational terms that may not be familiar to you. So please, I want this to be more informal. Please raise your hand or whatever if you have a question, if I'm using a term you're not familiar with, and I will be stopping frequently for more discussion. So I hope that you'll feel free to ask questions along the way. What I wanted to address today was actually the second part of assessment. Last month I talked more about student assessment directly, and I was asked to focus more on professional skills. And for today, I'm also talking about assessment, but with more of a focus on what the faculty member needs to do. And also talking about how we can use the assessment we're doing of students and use that to improve our programs. And that's the critical component for accreditation. I'd like today's discussion to be very practical. I'm going to give many examples from our clinical teaching, and I was asked again to try to address professionalism. So you'll see a couple of handouts that I provided, which provide just the introduction to our ethics and professionalism course at Tufts, just the first couple of pages of the syllabus. I also included just our institutional objectives, again, just a couple pages, so you can get a sense of the kinds of things that we're using as our broad objectives to design our curriculum. So I'll be referring to them later in the talk, but I wanted you to have those and have time to look at them. I have many more documents, very specific objectives. If these are institutional level objectives, and then I gave you an example of just the beginning of a course syllabus, but there are many documents that we have that really drill down to the very specific observable behaviors for professionalism. And if those are things you're also interested in, be happy to share those with you, but I didn't want to give you too many handouts. So just to let you know that those are available. So what I'd like to do is be able to focus more on faculty development, particularly around professionalism and for clinical teachers. Also, as I mentioned, program improvement. And I hope that this will be more of a dialogue so that we can really be exchanging ideas. So this should be familiar for those of you who came last time. You know, I talked about helping our students reach the goal of graduating from medical school, and we assess them. You know, all the A's are the points of assessment where we as faculty check to see what their progress is towards the goal of graduation. But what we're going to do today is really look at the assessments that we make of the students and see how we can apply that to actually improve what we do as faculty. And so we want to be looking at, can we be more effective in our teaching, and can we ensure that our graduates are going to be successful in the next stage of their training when they enter internships and residency. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the qualities of assessment. You know, some of you are experts in assessment, and so this is pretty elementary for you. But I just wanted to stress the various qualities of assessment: reliability, validity, transparency, authenticity, and adaptability. And these are all qualities of assessment that are important for accreditation. However, if we really are honest with ourselves when we look at the assessments that we do of our students, we mainly assess with instruments that are reliable, meaning that we get consistent results year to year. However, the rest of these are not well addressed. You know, typically we rely on multiple choice exams, and are they truly valid? Are they really assessing what we want them to assess? And when we're talking about professionalism, we know that multiple choice tests are not the way to go. Same thing, you know, are they transparent? Do the students really know what we're assessing them on? And a lot of times, they don't. Are they authentic? Does it really support relevant outcomes? Meaning, okay, we're teaching them knowledge, but are they able to apply that knowledge actually in clinical problem solving with real patients? And then finally, are they adaptable? Can you look at your assessments and actually change them according to the data that you're receiving about those assessments and continuously improve your programs? And that's a point that is very important for accreditation. That's what they're looking for, the continuous quality improvement. And the other thing that I mentioned last time was the link between assessment and feedback. That assessment is how we measure what learning has occurred at a point in time. So we're the assessment of learning. But the feedback that we give to the students, the feedback is for learning. We're providing information to the student in order for them to gain mastery. And I think that distinction is really important. And you know, we often forget, we get so focused on creating an assessment tool that we forget to check whether we're providing feedback from that assessment to help the student gain mastery. And the feedback is not just for the students. The system at an institution is actually quite complex, and I know several of you are involved with accreditation. And you know, when we're looking at assessments, we're often focused just on the student, but it really is a complex system. And so we're creating student assessments, looking at what their current needs are, and looking at what competencies they need to graduate to be a competent physician, to be able to perform at their next stage of training. But it's intertwined with what we do with faculty around teaching quality and their promotions. It's closely linked to program development. You know, are the programs actually meeting the needs of the mission of the institution? Are the programs worthy of continued funding? And the institutional assessment, that's where accreditation comes in. Accreditation is really at the institutional level. And they want to see that you're meeting whatever the mission of your school is. They want to ensure that the data that you provide during accreditation is able to show that you are meeting the mission that your institution has set out to do. So, you know, I think that it's really critical that we think about how we're using feedback from all the levels of assessment that we're doing, whether it's the student level, faculty level, program level, or institutional level. At all four levels, we need to make sure that we're checking to see whether what we're doing is effective and how we can continuously improve. So for the faculty, you know, I want to stress the faculty today. So as faculty, we look at our students and we think about how do we design teaching plans for our students. And so, you know, taking the perspective of the faculty here and saying, I, as a faculty member, am self-assessing my teaching skills. And the way that I do that is I look at what expectations do I have of my students. Have I made those expectations clear to the students? Do they know what I expect of them? The assignments that I give to them, are the assignments actually reinforcing what I'm trying to teach? And I'm giving, these are just examples. And so if I'm working in a clinical setting and I'm having students keep logs of the patients that they see, are the logs reasonable? Am I asking them to document things that are actually reasonable for their level of training and also in the clinical environment that I've put them in? You know, or am I asking them to document things that they're just not going to see? If I'm adding simulation, is the simulation really sufficient to have them gain the skills that I expect of them? And I'll be able to tell when I actually directly observe them. Because when I observe them, I can see whether or not all this other training has been effective or not. Because I'll be observing them working with a real patient. And I'll know, did this work? So I just want to mention here a process that we've used at Tufts for quite a number of years. And this is used in the first couple of years of the curriculum when it's more classroom-based. And you know, those of you who are interested in accreditation, excuse me, this will be potentially useful for you. We have the students actually self-elect 2 representatives from each class. So our classes are quite large. We have 200 students per cohort. And then however many courses are running at a time, The student body of 200 students elects 2 student representatives per unit. You know, some of them aren't really courses, but you know, if it's ethics and professionalism, if there's anatomy, if there's physiology, they elect 2 student representatives for each unit that's happening in the curriculum at a given time. And those student representatives actually meet with the Dean for Education and a couple of other administrators every other week. You think, boy, that's awfully frequent. But it really has served, it has worked incredibly well, particularly when we were going through major change. So if you are contemplating significant change in your curriculum, I would recommend some form of this kind of process, where you're able to take the student representatives, have them meet with the administration and whoever's responsible for the curriculum, and they're able to give you immediate feedback around the content that's happening and the methods. And so I'll give you some concrete examples. So when we started changing our curriculum, you know, it actually always takes a couple of years for things to smooth out. You know, the first time you run something brand new, there are always problems. And by having these student representatives, as we were changing the curriculum, they were able to give us immediate feedback with problems that had cropped up that we didn't think about. And one of the biggest problems was the pacing and timing, because we had done away with regular courses, and we were trying to integrate a lot of courses together at the same time. And the first time we tried this, we completely overloaded the students. They were completely overwhelmed, you know, because the faculty got so enthusiastic about adding, you know, instead of really tailoring the content, there's always the tendency of the faculty, oh, you know, they have to know this, and so, you know, faculty member would insert something else, oh, and someone else on the team would say, we have to include this. And so what happened was students were completely overwhelmed with the amount of material, and also that the pacing of the testing was just overwhelming. And so by having the feedback, the constant feedback, we were able to adjust the pacing of the curriculum and change the pacing of the testing so that it was much more reasonable for the students. And it also really helped the students buy into the new curriculum. So rather than saying, oh, you know, this doesn't work, and having the students rebel, because they were very much a part of the process and constantly giving feedback and seeing changes resulting from their feedback, they became very, very engaged with the process. So, you know, I want to mention here the use of focus groups. And so how many of you have used focus groups with your students? Use focus groups? Yeah. So you want to give an example of when you've used it?
Thank you. So I did a preparation course for the students who go overseas to clinical clerkships in other countries. And we started it 2 years ago, and each time we've had a focus group to find ways to improve it and to find out before the course what their expectations were, during the course if it was going as they expected, and then after, when they've been on their clerkships, when they come back, how useful they found it. So we tried to get as many students as possible to be involved in each stage of the process, and it worked quite well. They were comfortable, and we got some good feedback.
Yeah. Any other examples of folks using small focus groups, getting feedback? haven't tried it yet, you know, I would strongly urge you to give it a try. Usually, it's with the same cohort, meaning, you know, same group of students, same year. We found that sometimes mixing years of students, the younger students sometimes get intimidated by the older students, so we typically will have a cohort just from the same year. But, you know, an example here of an issue that we helped resolve was poor attendance to some things that we felt were critical for them to attend. And we were able, through the small groups, to identify the competing demands that we had made on them. We helped reaffirm the goals, and then brainstormed with them solutions. And the other thing was, okay, you have created some solutions with a small group, but will it really apply to the 200 students? So we would identify some potential solutions and then actually present it to the whole class and say, you know, here are ideas that we came up with. What do you think? And we could do it either through polling or show of hands or whatever. And but it has worked tremendously well. And then the final point is that I had mentioned this the last time about modeling professional feedback behavior. We actually train the students how to give constructive feedback. And each of these processes builds, you know, reinforces with the students how to give professional feedback. And it's worked tremendously well. So another example that I want to give is one of the things that came from a faculty focus group is that the issue that we were not teaching professionalism adequately. And so how many of you are familiar with the white coat ceremony? Is that familiar here? Very, very common in the United States. Arthur P. Gold was a neuroscientist, faculty member who created a foundation to encourage medical schools to have what's called the white coat ceremony, where students entering clinical work would go through a ceremony and say the Hippocratic Oath to affirm their professional values. And so we previously had done this similar to other schools, which was traditionally done right before they entered the third-year clerkships. But we thought, wait a minute, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. We really need to be able to build their idea of professionalism over time. So we actually, through feedback, moved this to the beginning of the first year. And we have them not just say the oath, we actually have them write an essay about what the oath means to them at the beginning of first year. And at that time, they're really like a lay person, you know, because they haven't been socialized into medicine yet. So their response to the Hippocratic Oath is very much like their patients would read the Hippocratic Oath. But they write an essay, and then right before they graduate in fourth year, we have them look at the oath again and write down thoughts that they have about what the oath means to them at the end of fourth year, right before they graduate. And then we have them compare it to what they wrote in first year. And it's extremely moving for the students. I mean, it really drives home to them how much they have grown over the 4 years, what their ideas of professionalism were early on versus how it changed over the 4 years. It's been very powerful. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the professional attributes that are now being judged through, and we need to document them actually in the formal recommendation that the deans provide for residency. And these professional attributes, I mean, these just come directly from the required list. And ability to treat patients with compassion, honesty and integrity, respect for others, advocate for patients, the communication skills, commitment to putting the needs of others before one's own needs. And so these are things that our Dean of Students actually has to specifically address in the Dean's letter for their residency. Chris, do you have a question?
Yes, please. Could you tell us what MSPE means?
Yeah, sorry, it disappeared from this slide, but it's on the next one, which is the Medical Student Performance Evaluation. So it actually used to be called the Dean's Letter, but this is a formal document that has to go into the residency, the National Residency Application Service. And the dean actually has to comment on all of these areas for each student. And so in order for the dean to comment, you have to be assessing this, you know, during their program. So we looked at, you know, are we actually teaching professionalism and tracking it over time? And so we found that we had to really make much more explicit what our expectations are. It begins at orientation. When they start anatomy, we remind them that the cadaver is their first patient, and we also have a memorial ceremony at the end of anatomy, thanking the families and the patients who donated their bodies for anatomy, white coat ceremony, etc. So very explicit goals right from the beginning. The socialization process happens throughout, and teaching, modeling, and assessing behavior happens really throughout the curriculum. Central tracking is critical, and this is where our Dean of Students comes in. So I mentioned the last time that none of our lectures are required, so students can come or not. However, all the small groups are required, and any presentations where there is a patient are required. And if students do not attend, there are marks that are made against their record, if there are a couple of marks, they actually then go before a faculty committee. They can go up against promotions committee. It's actually taken quite seriously. And the students know it counts because those little tick marks on their record go into their medical student performance evaluation for residency, and they cannot receive honors in any clerkship if their professionalism evaluation is not excellent. And our Dean of Students, looking back at reasons for dismissal from the medical school, doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it's typically due to unprofessional behavior, not academic reasons. So I wanted to stop here for a moment and have us think about these issues a little bit more. What of these are relevant, surprising, or does it confirm what you think about trying to reinforce professional behavior over curriculum? What's your reaction to longitudinal tracking of professionalism? Is it something that you think, are you doing it already? Is it something that you might contemplate? Does it seem just too far off the beaten path to address? Too difficult to address?
Probably in many medical schools, faculty members know those issues, but not so systematically information is stored. That's why it's not used for decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, we previously did not have it centrally tracked. And then we realized when there were certain students that we knew were a problem, we did not have enough documentation, because if an individual, if a student was in one clerkship and there were some professionalism problems, said, well, they're not that mature yet, they're probably going to be fine in the next one. And so they would go to the next clerkship, and then there would be some issues. Oh, they're kind of having some trouble, but they still have time to mature. Maybe they'll do okay in the next one. And they go into the next clerkship. And so we found that when we uncovered a student with difficulty, when we went back and interviewed the faculty in the different clerkships, they all said, yeah, there were some problems, but we weren't sure how to document it. We weren't sure what we should do, how, et cetera. So we actually, over time, took time to figure out a system that would work. But we finally figured out a way of allowing faculty to flag problems. Not that they would fail them immediately, but, there's an issue here. And so we have a system where the student then would actually get very specific feedback. They would get interviewed and to try to figure out what the issues were. The idea is you want to give them formative feedback, to give them an opportunity to improve. And we try to support them and see, can they change their behavior? And so then they go into the next clerkship, hopefully with some more information, some feedback, and some strategies to improve, and then we can see how they do. But previously we did not have a good system. It was very fragmented, no central tracking. But we found that if we're truly able, if we as a profession are responsible for tracking our students, the only way we can do it is centrally. So it slowly evolved. So another example where one of the other pieces of feedback we got is that the students did not have enough clinical skills going into the third year clerkship. And so we found that we had to increase their training starting from year one. So we started to develop what's called the competency-based apprenticeship in primary care. And so this starts towards the latter part of the first year. And for years, we said the apprenticeship was not a good way to train. It used to be that way years and years ago, but they got rid of apprenticeships. But now we're talking about a 21st century apprentice. And so how is that different? And rather than just being simply experience-based, we're talking about things being competency-based. And so the question is competent in what skills and at what level? And so when we think about having our students work in clinical sites in the community, we need to think about having them learn not just from the faculty members, but also from the patients and the staff in the office, and also their peers. So what we've done is, for this apprenticeship, students are always sent to offices in pairs. And so there's always a colleague for them to help train each other. So for the faculty, you think about, for 200 students, trying to recruit 100 faculty preceptors, because we have 100 pairs of students. You can imagine the challenges of trying to recruit those faculty, and the faculty saying, well, I don't have enough time to teach, I have a busy clinical practice, student presentations take too long, students ask too many questions, they bring up sensitive subjects with patients when I don't want them to, patients won't accept them, how do I document the work that they do, and I don't have enough space for them anyway. So many issues that faculty have brought up. And so I would imagine some of these sound similar to what you might have heard from your own faculty. Do these look familiar? And so what we did actually to try to address these is looking at how students could help busy clinical faculty. So we did faculty development workshops, did some surveys, and actually came up with top 10 ways for students to help the faculty in the clinic. And so with this, this is the list that our community faculty came up with. So they thought, well, if a student, and remember, these are beginning students, so they're just in their first year, so they don't really know any medicine yet. But they can help with patient education, so they can help find patient education materials and go over them with the patients. They're learning, we train them in search skills. We have very specific training with our librarians who have been trained in evidence-based medicine. So the students actually are very good at finding information on the web. So they can help these busy clinical faculty research the latest evidence on whatever topic that comes up. They can help them write notes, they can help counsel the patients, help with geriatric evaluations, which actually take a long time, go over medications, just make sure that the medications that's on the patient list is actually the ones that they're actually taking, help call the patients to get their labs done. Room patients means getting the patients into the examination room, presenting the case succinctly, and also giving the preceptors some quiet time. And so what we did was we took these 10 suggestions and actually created specific workshops for students, and broke down those 10 suggestions into these several areas. And at the end of your handout, I actually included a more detailed list of how each of these breaks down. And so the students actually get these workshops before they go out to the preceptorships. And so they're already trained in how to be helpful even in year one at these clinical sites. So any questions about these?
I have a question about students there.
Sure.
Students have a different level of competency.
Yes.
So how do you make students fair? For example, I'm teaching anatomy, and we have 4 students at one table,
Mm-hmm.
and they do dissection.
Yes.
But level of those students are quite different,
Right.
and there's always a fixed relationship,
Yes.
not mutual or reciprocal.
Mm.
Some students it is always ordering the others what to do.
Yes.
So that kind of peer assessment,
Yes.
if those students have a fixed relationship,
Yes.
peer review is not working well, I think.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how do you make those pairs?
Yeah. So the pairs actually are randomly assigned, and the students actually go through training how to assess each other. And so because things are competency-based, and it's clear to everyone what competencies they're actually practicing with each other, it's not just the pair. You know, they only, they go to the site as a pair, but the training that they undergo is actually back at the medical school with everyone. So they see, you know, as a large group, what has to get done. If there are issues within the pair, and it happens rarely, but, you know, it does happen, we feel that that's part of their learning as well, you know, how to work with people that don't quite match, you know, the way that you like to work. And that's part of the learning process, because they have to be able to work in teams and work with people that are not like them, and so that's part of the learning process. So when that happens, you know, that's where the preceptor can help, or if the preceptor's not comfortable with that, that's when the course faculty would actually help work with that pair to resolve those issues. But because this is very competency-based, where it's clear how they're assessing each other, and because this is not just one course where they're doing this, you know, they have to learn how to give feedback in problem-based learning. They all along in many other courses, they're constantly giving feedback to each other. That's a very specific thing that is in the curriculum. They're learning how to give feedback to each other, learning how to give feedback to their faculty, which, you know, for some students is pretty uncomfortable at the beginning. You know, some students are very comfortable right away, but, you know, other students are very reluctant. Oh my gosh, how can I say anything to my teacher? But that, again, is part of what they're getting trained to do. So, you know, definitely early on, there tend to be more of these little mini conflicts. but then they quickly learn how to work with each other.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, I think it's pretty clear to see the slides. I don't think we need to shut the lights off. So the workshops for students, they're prepared before going into the clinical sites. And then the student input, it's interesting when you have the students assess each other, there's always that little bit of competition too, right? And so peer assessment's actually often tougher than the faculty assessments. But where the advantage is because whatever the competency is that the faculty member is supposed to assess them on, the students are assessing each other first. And so, and if they're actually tougher, they're very well prepared before the faculty actually needs to assess them. So the faculty is providing a check rather than needing to teach them from the very beginning, which used to be the case. The students also, when you're involving them in the creation, they actually are more comfortable with the assessments because they've helped to design them. And as I mentioned, this is all part of socialization into the profession. And this last one, students need to have responsibility to learn responsibility. I think that's another critical piece. They need to start taking some responsibility for the patients early on, for them to feel that both that they're contributing and also that they can start feeling the growth as a professional. So the student-preceptor relationship, the students actually, because they're in this site for over 20 weeks, they start building a nice relationship with the preceptor. They start actually getting to know some of the patients over time. And the students basically exchange the help that they provide in the clinic. They save some time for the faculty member and they get teaching in return. And there have actually been quite a number of studies looking at the value that students add to a clinical site. And what's interesting is that patients often view their physicians in even higher esteem when they see that their doctor is teaching. Oh, my doctor is a professor. And it's really critical the way that the doctor introduces the student. That makes a huge difference on how well accepted the student is to the by the patient. So faculty feedback was interesting. This was just from 1 year of the cohort after they began the program. 72% of the community faculty doing this preceptorship felt that it was time neutral, or that 28% of the 72% actually helped them, felt that the students actually helped them get through the day even faster. And that's pretty remarkable, because faculty usually say, oh, students will always add more time to my day. But by specifically finding ways in which the student could help them get their work done, over 70% of the faculty actually felt having the student there was time neutral, or good percentage actually felt it helped them get through the day faster, and that 94% of them felt that teaching in this program increased their professional satisfaction. That's pretty remarkable. The faculty for this program actually are continuing to collect the data, and we'll see, how these numbers hold up over time. Just want to interject project here attributes of a positive mentor. And you know, we give workshops to the students, but we also give workshops to the faculty to prepare them for how the students, you know, we remind the clinical faculty how the students might help them in the office, you know, and give them hints on how you can incorporate the student into your office and keep the workflow going. And there are actually many studies looking at what are the attributes of a positive mentor. This one happens to be a literature review study done by some faculty from the Netherlands. It was published in Academic Medicine. But these attributes, I think, make sense to you. And you know, I know Dr. Kitamura, you just came back from a program where they were really emphasizing empathy. You know, I don't know if you have any comments here in terms of what you learned from that conference with empathy and professionalism.
In Japan, the professionalism is a key word to teach. But in United States, many words are used. Of course, professionalism are used. But that is okay or no. It means unprofessional is not good. But how much good the student are, that's very important, but not measurable. They try using the empathy. They try to measure how much empathy I understand that.
And so did they talk about possible measures, how they might measure empathy?
I don't know so far.
We have developed some kind of questionnaire to measure.
Yeah. I know that, you know, there are many groups looking at all of these different facets, you know, and trying to see, you know, different ways of measuring, you know, empathic attributes, you know, yeah, it's ongoing work, and be interesting to see how that evolves. So I want to mention here the importance of observation. So, you know, in the clinics, faculty are extremely busy, and you know, there'll be days when they say, well, you know, I don't have time to teach the student, you know, I'm just running, whether, you know, it's on the wards or in the clinic. But it's really important during those busy times that you provide the student with some structure for how they observe the busy work within your clinic. You know, whether it's in the wards or in an ambulatory clinic. The student really needs to know what to look for. And then after they have observed, you know, to just be very quick. You say, what did you see? And you get some sense if they actually observed anything that had gone on. So, you know, one example was I was taking care of a patient in the hospital, and the patient had very complicated history, and they had been transferred in from another hospital. The family was extremely upset because they felt that things weren't happening the way that they thought they would, et cetera. And so I knew that I was going to walk into a room with angry family members. And so on one hand, I could have gone in there by myself, but I thought it was important for my students to actually observe me talking with an angry family. And so I prepared them by saying, I hear, because I heard from the nurses, the nurses warned me, they said, this family's really upset. And so I, told the students, you can just come in with me, stay quiet, be off to the side. I'm going to be talking with this family, and I briefed them on how I was going to go about talking with the family. And so went in, talked with the family, straightened things out, calmed them down, and then when we came out of the room, I asked the students, what did you observe? And, they said, well, one thing was they observed, very aggressive posture by the father early on. But by the end of the discussion, they were relaxed and smiling. So that was a big observation, and so then it was, okay, well, what happened? How was I able to diffuse, this angry family? And so we dissected, what actually happened. And so, but if I had just pulled them in there without any prep, and the prep took 1 minute, but, if I took them in without any prep, they really would not have gotten as much out of that interaction. So, I think that it's really critical to just think, just for a moment, what it is we want the students to be observing as they're coming with us, around in our busy practices. The other thing is the focused observation of the student by you. And so what we found is that, and again, there are many studies looking at this, we as faculty, myself included, thought that we were good at observing students. We think we know what we're looking for. But actually, there are many studies showing that we actually don't observe very well unless we're trained around very specific standardized objectives. And so, our faculty didn't believe this, and we started documenting it, and realized, I guess I'm not really observing that closely. And so, again, it took time for us to develop what it is that, faculty should be observing. And I actually have a 100-page orientation manual to our third-year clerkships, if you're interested. And, where our faculty actually got very specific about all the requirements for each and every clerkship. But, until you create those standardized objectives, it's really hard to judge the students whether or not they've actually been able to attain what you expect. And also, the students don't have guidelines to follow. They need to guess what they need to learn. And so having those objectives for both you and them are really critical. So are those, what stage are you at this point with any of your clerkships? I mean, do you have standardized objectives that you use to measure student performance? Do any of you have those already, or working on them, or thinking about working on them? Where are you at this point with standardized objectives for clinical work?
in charge of the assessment and all the management for clinical practice.
Okay, so at the moment, not yet, not yet. You know, it took us a long time, and we actually did it clerkship by clerkship. So our hospital system is, you know, just for medicine, our students go to 7 different hospitals. And so for accreditation, it's required that we have to show that students going to these 7 different hospitals have a similar experience. It obviously is not going to be exactly the same, but we have to define all of the core competencies that we expect them to learn, regardless of what site they're at. That's really critical. And they want, our accreditation wants to see the data from all of the hospitals, all of the sites, all of the disciplines with all the comparative data. And it did take a while for us to create the systems, and there is a clerkship director. So if you take medicine, at each of the 7 sites, there is a director, a faculty member director for the students who rotate to each of those 7 sites. And then there's an overall clerkship director for medicine, who represents medicine. And then for surgery, there are 6 major sites. And again, a director at each site, and then 1 overall director. And so for each discipline, surgery, medicine, OBGYN, pediatrics, family medicine, psychiatry, for each of those, the clerkship directors meet once a quarter, so 4 times a year, and these are the kinds of things they discuss in terms of looking at the data that's being collected and getting the feedback, etc. And then the overall clerkship directors of all the different disciplines, the head directors of each discipline come together at least once a year to discuss clerkships overall. But when we were actually doing the work to come up with these objectives, we obviously had to meet more often. That was a lot of work over a couple of years. So the faculty, one of the things, you know, they're assessing the students, but what about getting assessment from their peers? So for our faculty, that comes through the curriculum committee. So I'd be interested to actually hear what your education committees look like. But I'll just quickly describe the process here. So our curriculum committee is made up of, it's all faculty, not department chairs. And most of the faculty that are on the curriculum committee typically are our, quote, top teachers. These are faculty who've won multiple teaching awards. And they have the overall responsibility for the curriculum. And on a 3-year cycle, the entire curriculum gets evaluated. So in any 1 year, in a 3-year sequence, 1/3 of the curriculum is evaluated very thoroughly. So courses and clerkships, you know, there'll be a handful of courses and clerkships each year that get a thorough evaluation. And so that includes looking at syllabus, all the teaching activities and assessments, the students, their student representatives, and the end of the unit evaluations, which students are required to submit. And then the peer evaluations are actually other faculty. So for any given course or clerkship, there will be a content expert, so a faculty member colleague in their discipline who evaluates their content. And then also a generalist to evaluate the course or clerkship from a generalist perspective. And this this 3-year cycle has worked extremely well, where the peers, who are actually members of the curriculum committee, evaluating all of these courses and clerkships, you know, the feedback has been tremendous, and it's been very collegial and very supportive in terms of helping faculty to improve their courses and clerkships. So any questions on this process?
So, could you give us an example how, what sort of feedback or comments the particular course organizer would get from like peers or students?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, you know, it's quite wide-ranging. So, you know, obviously depends on the course or clerkship. So, so for instance, you know, I'll give an example for one of the clerkships. So, OBGYN, when it first began its competency program, competency-based program, they created a whole list of syndromes and signs and symptoms that they expected all students to be able to evaluate. And one of the items on that patient log list was evaluation of women with potential ectopic pregnancy. And, you know, it sounds reasonable. You want every graduate to be able to recognize that as a potential problem. The problem was even though it was on the list, almost no students ever saw a patient for that workup. And so that was uncovered through this process. You know, otherwise they would never have known. And it wasn't just one hospital that was not able to meet it. It was actually none of the hospitals were able to meet that. And so that led to the clerkship actually creating a simulated case you know, on our e-learning system so that all students would be able to go through such a case and go through all the problem solving. You know, it can be, you know, something concrete like that, you know, around content that's missing. Or, you know, other courses, you know, I can recall courses where they felt that the examinations did not match the objectives of the course. And so the feedback from the students was, you know, you stated that the objectives of the course was this, and here was the examination, and it didn't seem to be related. And so now you have peers looking at it and saying, well, you know, why is there that discrepancy? And they would get feedback, so they would actually get direct feedback from their faculty peers, both from a content expert as well as from a generalist. And we felt that that was important because we wanted to stress that our curriculum was really generalist based. You know, because we're trying to develop physicians who could really work in any environment, whether they want to go into research or go into a subspecialty or whatever. But we feel that their 4 years of medical school is really like the liberal arts of medicine. You know, we should really train them as generalists, give them a really strong foundation for them to then specialize after medical school. So other questions? Okay, so you know, I think mentioned the last time about using patient log data. And, you know, it's critical for faculty to give formative feedback to the students as they're going through the clerkships and comparing them against the objectives and asking, are they ready to enter the next stage of training? And it's really critical that, you know, it's not just the patient logs, but that you're really mixing them with many other assessment methods. And you really need to, this is another thing that accreditation looks at. They actually want to see that, particularly for the clerkships, that you are assessing the students in multiple dimensions. And so it's not just direct observation, it's not just a multiple choice test. You know, our students actually have to take the National Board of Medical Examiners mini clerkship exams for each clerkship. You know, they go through simulation, we have OSCE examinations, and so students actually have multiple evaluations for each clerkship. And that's, you know, something that's really critical for the accreditation data. And they want to see that you're comparing the students across the cohort. And they want to see that you really are ensuring that all students are competent, and what evidence do you have that students are competent. The other thing that's been really useful is by using these logs and looking at the data across multiple hospitals, we've been able to share best practices. And so the surgery rotation, for instance, you know, the flagship hospital, our main hospital, always prided itself on, you know, providing wonderful clerkships. And the surgery clerkship used to be the most popular. And then for a number of reasons, you know, it started going down, down, down in the student evaluations. And the chief of surgery was very upset. You know, he said, you know, my clerkship should be the best, and, you know, why is it now the worst? I mean, it literally became the worst clerkship, worst evaluated clerkship out of all the sites. And through this process, we were actually able to determine what the other sites were doing well and what was going wrong within, you know, the main site. And part of it was at our main hospital, the surgery is so subspecialized. You know, they do transplants, they do, you know, major complicated surgery. Students don't get to do anything. You know, in a major transplant operation, they're basically looking. They might hold a retractor, but they're not going to do anything. Whereas at the community hospitals, they actually could assist. And so, you know, what they actually ended up doing is actually combining the main hospital's rotation and paired them with a community hospital. So the students got the best of both worlds. They got to see really complicated, interesting surgery, but they also were able to rotate for part of the time at a community hospital where it was much more hands-on. And you know, there were other issues as well which they fixed, and you know, their ratings came up and they were very happy. But it was really through this process that allowed them to do this. So the input, you know, for the faculty is, you know, when they go through the curriculum committee process, based on the goals of my program, based on the goals of my course, and the feedback that I got from the curriculum committee, what do I need to revise? And so, you know, I think that this is where, you know, I get a lot of questions as well. Okay, now that I know that I have to fix all these things, you know, how do I have time to do this? And what we found is that whether it was for courses in the first couple of years, there was much more team development of courses. And so with our integrated curriculum, we combined clinical faculty with basic science faculty to create teams, to create courses. Also, I'll give an example of our microbiology course. It's actually one of our major departments. Tufts is well known for its infectious disease research. We have a couple Howard Hughes investigators, which is very prestigious in the US. They have many, many grants. It's one of the most productive departments in the basic sciences. And so how would they have time to teach a course? Well, they actually created the course as a department, and they take turns teaching the course. And depending on whose research, if you need to get a major grant in this year, then you're not teaching this year. Someone else in the department is teaching it. So they were able to figure out a way of leveraging the department to be able to team teach. Then, there are other groups where they mix faculty from multiple departments. The other thing is faculty getting individual education consultation. So we do have, it's not quite like IRCME, but we do have a Center for Enhancement of Learning and Teaching that faculty can use to help them create their courses. We also have little fellowships within the university. So faculty who are undergoing major revision of a course or clerkship, they can become a fellow and get little mini grants to offset some of their time to do major revision. We also have many faculty development workshops running throughout the year, and they also can tap into the university's technical design assistance. So, as I mentioned, everything is online, and so at this point, most of the faculty are very adept at using all the tools, so they don't need as much help anymore, but early on, they needed much more support to move things onto the e-learning system. So any questions about the course revision path? I know that that's another challenge for faculty in terms of finding the time and also the support to make major change. Any questions or comments here? All right, and finally, I just want to talk about the program perspective. We talked about the faculty perspective, but on a larger scale, you want to look programmatically what needs to change in each segment of your program. And the emphasis in evaluation, as I mentioned earlier, for accreditation is they're looking for evidence and they're looking for continuous renewal. I mentioned how we use the patient log reports, and those have been critical. Looking at the clerkships is one of the things that our accreditation system looks very carefully at, because they realize it's much harder to collect data for clerkships, and so they always spend much more time looking at your data from your clerkships. And so thankfully, because all of our systems are online, we're able to provide that data relatively easily. The other thing is being able to track all the curriculum hours. And And even though we don't have set typical courses by semester, ours are very much integrated, we still have to account for every hour of learning time. And so luckily, you know, again, having it online really makes it much easier. And so we have to be able to document what is being taught where, when, by whom, how it's being assessed. And then all of that data then, you know, gets put into this cascade. So they want to see that at the school level, that we have linked our school level competencies to the national competencies, which are put out both by the AAMC as well as the ACGME, and then it's assessed by the accrediting body, the Liaison Commission on Medical Education. And each of those school level competencies are then tracked into every course in clerkship. And so in our electronic system, we're actually able to link each school competency into each individual course and clerkship competency and track it back to every national competency. And so you'll see in the handout under the institutional objectives, you'll see little abbreviations and numbers after each objective. And those actually track back to the specific ACGME competencies. And you know, this is again something that the accrediting body is looking for. They want to see that you know, they're not dictating which competencies you address, but you have to show that it's based on something. And you know, the fact that the students are going to be assessed at the residency level by the ACGME competencies, it obviously makes sense that, you know, the medical school level competencies must track to those residency competencies. And you know, I don't know if any of you have heard about the new yet further competencies that are being put out by AAMC, you know, called EPAs. And you know, these are professional attributes that they're expecting every graduate from a US and Canadian medical school to be certified in before they start their internship. And they're stating that these are for patient safety reasons, but it's also a way of ensuring that the students know exactly what the goals are, what skills they're expected to demonstrate on the first day of their internship. So with that, you know, that have you think about possible steps for your course or school, and you know, we have a few more minutes for any additional questions. This is from the East Garden at the Imperial Gardens.
Okay, thank you very much.